everyone. Thanks so much for joining us for Ask the Expert North Texas. I'm Kristen Diaz.
David Rankin. The White House putting new restrictions on selling guns. These new rules are supposed to close up what they call the gun show loophole. All gun dealers have to have a license, and they have to conduct background checks everywhere. That's even if they sell guns at their stores, from their homes, online, or even at gun shows. On today's Ask the Expert, we're joined by Stefanie Feldman. She is the White House Director of the Office of Gun Violence Prevention. She is in the KRLD Zoom room. Stefanie, thank you so much for taking the time to chat.
Thank you for having me.
The gun show loophole has been around for such a long time. How did the president decide to make this move today?
So President Biden has been fighting for universal background checks, which is background checks on all gun sales, pretty much soon after the Columbine High School shooting happened in 1999. So this is 25 years in the making. In 2013, when he was vice president, he stood in the Rose Garden with the families who lost their loved ones in the Sandy Hook Elementary School shooting when Congress failed to enact universal background checks. But then in 2022, President Biden signed into law the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act, which isn't universal background checks, but it is a big step forward, the closest we've gotten to there. And it included a change that allowed the action today, which is the biggest expansion of the background check requirement since the Brady bill went into law in 1993.
Right now, gun violence has been a big stain in our current history, dating back these past few recent years, as you mentioned there, Sandy Hook. So it doesn't seem like one administration will be able to fix this problem. This might be something we're going to continue to see in future administrations. What is the groundwork that this lays out for U.S. history to be able to build upon this, hopefully in the future?
Yes. So President Biden has taken a series of actions to address the supply of firearms into our communities, which is really unprecedented and something that no prior president has done. So this is a piece of the puzzle. You have us making sure that unlicensed dealers are becoming licensed and running background checks. In addition, President Biden signed into law the first ever law that includes specific anti-trafficking provision that the Department of Justice has used to prosecute firearms traffickers. We issued a final rule on ghost guns, which tackles manufacturers of guns that are unserialized and ending up in our communities. And then the president also installed Steve Dettelbach as a Senate-confirmed leader of the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, who has established zero tolerance for rogue gun dealers who willfully violate the law. So you can see every step along the way, the president is taking action to stem the flow of guns into our communities that are being used to commit crimes. And that's a key piece of the puzzle. This is a effort not for any one generation or any one president, but he's made historic progress that we are going to feel the ripple effect for decades to come.
Let's talk about the whole concept of background checks. Do they work?
They absolutely work. We know that since the background check system went into place in the late 90s, it has kept guns out of the hands of more than 3 million individuals who are prohibited from purchasing firearms under federal law, which includes people like domestic abusers, felons, people who have been involuntarily committed to a mental institution, a range of people who are a danger to themselves or others. We also know that people have actively tried to find unlicensed dealers in order to obtain a weapon and commit crimes. We saw that in Columbine. We saw that in the shooting in Odessa, Texas a couple years ago. We've seen it again and again. And lastly, we know that unlicensed dealers of firearms are the biggest supplier of firearms that are trafficked and used in crimes all across this country. So we know that background checks work. And we know that the gap in the background check system is making our communities more dangerous. And that's exactly why President Biden and his administration are taking action.
A lot of Americans, they really don't know all the different task force that we have here in America. Can we talk about yours in particular and the type of work that you come in and you do day in and day out, and your focus specifically on gun violence, and how can that's got to be such a daunting task? How do you guys break it down?
Yeah, so President Biden started on day one of his administration taking action to reduce gun violence, and he had taken dozens of actions by last fall, but he wanted to accelerate that progress. So he established the first ever White House Office of Gun Violence Prevention and asked Vice President Harris to oversee that work in order to have a single team that was solely focused on waking up every day to address all forms of gun violence. So not only mass shootings, but also community violence, suicide by firearm, accidental shootings, and think about all of the steps in the process where we can prevent and address violence. So that is violence prevention, addressing the root causes of violence. That is investing in community violence interventions, which send trusted individuals into communities to mediate conflict and prevent violence from becoming deadly. And it means helping communities deal with the trauma resulting from gun violence. So we have a team here at the White House now waking up every day to work on that. And it is tough work, but we are driven by the fact that we work with gun violence prevention advocates and experts every day who have lost loved ones to gun violence, who have survived gun violence, and they find a way to keep going every day. And they are the ones who energize and mobilize because they're not doing it for themselves or for their loved ones. It's too late for them. They're doing it to keep your family safe, to keep my family safe. And so we're in this fight with them.
What do you think are going to be the ramifications from the folks that will say background checks interfere with my Second Amendment rights to own a gun?
I'm sure people will say that. I respectfully disagree. They're just wrong. There are common sense steps that we can take to keep guns out of the hands of dangerous individuals. This is not about keeping guns out of the hands of responsible gun owners. In fact, we have gun owners in the White House Office of Gun Violence Prevention. But what this is about is it's about keeping communities safe. And what's really exciting is finally in this country, we are seeing that the vocal majority is rising up and making clear that they want common sense action. Almost 400,000 people submitted a comment during the public comment process for this action, and 3/4 of them said that they supported this action. The vast majority of Americans want universal background checks, which goes even further than this rule and is something that President Biden supports. So the vast majority of Americans, in fact, the vast majority of gun owners want common sense steps to keep guns out of dangerous hands, which is what President Biden is doing today.
What are some of the bipartisan issues that you guys are dealing with right now, the challenges, and how do you plan to overcome them right now?
Yeah, so gun violence is always a tricky issue in Washington, which is frustrating because I know at dinner tables all across the country, it's actually not a partisan issue. It doesn't matter if you're Republican or Democrat or independent or something else. You don't want to lose a loved one to gun violence. You don't want your kids to live in fear when they're in school every day, whether a shooter is going to come to their school. We are working with Republicans, especially at the state and local level, to implement the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act, which, as I said, is the 2022 legislation that the president signed into law. And there are some steps that everyone agrees on. For example, if you're going to own a gun, store it safely. Make sure that people, your children, or anyone else in your community can't go access that gun. So the Department of Education recently took action to send a letter to all school principals encouraging them to have a conversation with families about safe storage of firearms, something that the vast majority of gun owners support. We're also working with states to implement extreme risk protection orders, which allow someone to tell a court, hey, we think that this person is experiencing a moment of crisis, is threatening someone, or is doing something else worrisome, and then a court can decide to temporarily remove someone's access to firearms. A common sense step has due process, so someone can appeal, has an ability for someone to regain possession of a firearm after they are through that moment of crisis, and is a proven strategy not only to reduce crime, but also to reduce suicide by firearm, where we know that temporarily separating someone from their firearm can give them the opportunity to get through that moment of crisis. So we try to find common ground to start off the conversation, and then you can build up to some of the actions that we here at the White House firmly believe are necessary to reduce gun violence, like an assault weapons ban, but might not have the same level of support yet among gun owners.
Stefanie Feldman's the director of the Office of Gun Violence Prevention at the White House on Ask the Expert. Thank you so much for the time.
Thank you.